you could go to the speaker introduction slide, we will get to our main attraction today. I wanted to say thank you for Monika Weber for being here. She is with the Boulder Office of Emergency Management. You know that we now have an emergency readiness committee here at Boulder Rotary. It is to help us help others in our community and other places, because we have a lot of things that happen to us: floods, fires, pandemics, and all of those other things. We actually have had tornadoes and things like that. The Office of Emergency Management is the most amazing tool. I hope all of you become familiar with the website and all of the things that it offers. And in fact, we're going to have a training on February 11th. Monika, you're going to be the one that does it, is that right? So she's going to come back and help us to talk to others about preparedness for all types of emergency. And I can tell you right now that we have used this several times in the last year. Thank you very much to Charlotte, who often calls me when there's a fire. And then we now have the tool of looking at the Office of Emergency Management fire map, where the affected areas are if there's an evacuation, and we can go to the Boulder Rotary website, which we've done several times, and we call everybody who's in that area and ask them if they're okay, if they need help, and if they're aware of what's going on. So that's just one of the things that the Office of Emergency Management helps make happen to make this place a safer place. So I want you to all welcome Monika Weber, and really interested to hear what she has to say.
Hello, and thank you for having me. Today we'll be going through kind of a Cliff Notes version of what we'll be talking about at the February 11th session. So with that, if you enjoy what you see here today, or you have, oh wonderful, a slide clicker. But if you enjoy what you see here today, if I don't bore you to death with the overly exciting topic of emergency management, disaster management type of things, it can be a bit dry at times, but I'll try to keep it interesting. You should join us for that 11th date, because that's when we'll really be taking a deep dive. So with that, I will also ask that if you have questions, hold on to those, jot those down, and we'll hit those at the end, just so we don't go down any rabbit holes, because it's very easy with this content to get into those kind of niche topical areas, and then we'll miss the rest of the slides. So I want to make sure that we've got time for that. And yeah, we'll jump right in. So like said, I'm from the Office of Emergency Management. You might hear us also referred to as the Office of Disaster Management. We are one and the same. So if you hear those things, that is an explanation of that. And we provide a lot of the coordination support when we do have disasters within our county, and we also serve the city of Boulder particularly. For other municipalities throughout our county, they all have their own emergency managers that work separately. So we are a catch-all, but also a focus directly on the city of Boulder as well. So for our agenda today, the things that we'll be going over in rapid succession are cycle of a disaster, just very briefly, alert and warning, which I think is top of mind for a lot of folks. We'll be talking about personal risk assessment, preparedness planning, so that you can kind of get your gears going on some things that could help you develop your own plan, and then talking a bit about evacuation as well. Outside of those topics, and I'll jot things down, but is there anything that if you leave this room today and you don't know, you're going to be like, wow, waste the time talking to her? Because if you do, shout it out, and I'll write it down so that I can incorporate it into what we talk about. Alrighty, so this sounds good. No one's got anything super pressing. Wonderful. So to go into this cycle of a disaster, this is just to provide some context. When we think about disasters, there's kind of four main stages that occur. The first is preparedness. So what we're doing today, what we're going to be doing on the 11th, you're in the exact right spot. You're doing the preparedness piece. And that's just the getting ready for activating should something occur. Response then is what we get into when we think about our first responders, other community groups that activate, because during a disaster, this is something we talk about more in depth on the 11th, but there's lots of roles beyond just fire and law enforcement. But we've got mass care folks that come out and get shelters set up. We've got our folks in public health that are doing air monitoring, soil monitoring, those kind of things to make sure that our community is safe as a whole and able to be resilient after a disaster. So that's a component of response. The recovery section is then the getting back to our baseline, getting back to normal. So that is what occurs during that. And then mitigation is where we take the things that we've learned from a particular disaster and start to work on improving them so we lessen the likelihood or lessen the severity of that happening in the future. So we're gonna preface the alert and warning component. Just think about, and you can chat with a neighbor about this, but how do you typically get notified of an emergency or a disaster when it's happening? And I will say there's no right answers for this, but you can yell it out if you're comfortable. If there's a microphone, we can run it around the room as well. Yeah. Amber Alert, yeah. So notifications through your phone that are kind of pushed through regardless if you're signed up for anything. Other ways that y'all find out? Call from a friend, emergency text I heard, yeah. Social media, wonderful. Y'all are ready to teach the class? Great, done. But yeah, there's lots of ways that are both traditional or formal, and then lots of informal ways that we find out as well. So as we go into alert and warning, we'll be talking about the different methods of finding out information and how you kind of keep that awareness. So to begin with, there's traditional methods, which are things that have been around quite a while. You might be familiar with them. And then some newer technologies as well that have a little bit of nuance in them that I'll explain. So first of which, outdoor warning sirens. Those are the loud sirens you'll hear. Those are typically used for flash flood warnings. They're also for folks that are outside. So if you think, I can't hear that in my house, wonderful. You're not supposed to hear it in your house. It's for folks that are out recreating, might be out on our open space, that type of thing. Then we've got our all hazards weather radios. So that is typically only used if the National Weather Service is gonna push something out. Our emergency alerts don't typically go through an all hazards weather alert radio, but those are really handy. And you can also, from a preparedness standpoint, get them where they have like flashlights built in and chargers built in. So a helpful resource. The emergency alert system, so if you have ever been driving around, you have the radio on, you hear that beautiful and then a robot talks to you, that's the emergency alert system. So that is, again, pushed through National Weather Service typically for those alerts. And then door-to-door. Door-to-door alerting is when our law enforcement officials or fire, depending on what the nature of the incident is, are going door to door and letting folks know in those critical need areas. And again, that's really contingent on number of personnel. I was talking to community members from a different municipality yesterday, and they said, like, I was shocked to know there's only 5 officers on at any given point. And that's a very true reality. So sometimes the door to door is not something that I would say depend on, but that's a way that we get information out. And then for newer technologies, we've got mobile apps. So that's things like weather apps that you might have local news apps, other things that you choose to download. Then we've got opt-in phone alerts, so that's Everbridge, which we use in our county. That's something where if you have a landline or a VoIP, yep, that line, it'll go directly to it, no need to register. If you have a cell phone, you have to register for Everbridge to get those alerts. And we'll talk about how you do that. And then a WEA, or wireless emergency alert, is a type of alert that goes out based on your location. So if you've used a cell phone within an area where there's a cell tower and a WEA gets sent out, you will get that alert. So that's really helpful for folks visiting the area, or when you go visit other areas, you'll get that automatically as long as your phone meets the grade of phone and service that they have. A really important thing to know about some of these alerting pieces is also it's contingent on your carrier and phone type. So sometimes folks will get a delay. That's because carriers, once they get that message, have to push it out, and they will sometimes expand. Typically, they always expand the area that they're pushing those to, and so sometimes folks that are out of the area get alerted, and so that can cause confusion. But these are our main 8 ways of getting notified from a formal component. And the notification terminology, I think, is important to go over. We've got advisories, so that's used to kind of prep you to say, hey, something's up, the conditions are right for something to happen. Then we've got a warning. That's to really get you prepared to take action. A warning stage is also when folks that might have lower mobility or other things where transportation isn't as easily ready should get going during the warning phase. And then an evacuation order or shelter-in-place order is this needs to happen now to keep yourself, those things around you safe. So that's a little bit on the terminology. If you'd like to sign up for Everbridge Alerts, you can scan this with your smartphone if you have one, and I'll take you to the website, and you can sign up right here and now, or pay attention to the rest of the presentation, whichever you choose. But you can scan it, and it'll pull up the website for you. And I can come back to this at the end as well. Alrighty, so all that alert and warning thing to say. And folks had some really good thoughts on how you get notified, friends let you know, social media let you know, formal ways let you know. I think the one takeaway, if you take nothing else from this, is your gut and your intuition is always going to be your first form of alert. And so knowing if you feel uneasy about something, you think this isn't quite right, don't wait for the technology piece, because the technology piece might not come. If cell phone towers are burned over, if there's flooding that occurs, right, any kind of disaster, that can sometimes hinder the ability of technology to work the way it should. And so this is really critical. If you sense something is up, probably start taking those steps to keep yourself and your loved ones safe right off the bat. So that's my __. Please always do that as we go through kind of the information gathering phase of disasters. So additional information sources, once you get that alert, you might be wondering, where do I go for additional information? Please don't call 911 unless you have a separate emergency, right, a medical emergency, something like that, because they get overloaded. During disasters, our dispatchers who work out of our building are constantly, 911, what's your emergency? It's a fire? Great. And so they've got someone that's just on it, kind of hanging up those phone calls so that they can still funnel in the true life safety emergencies that occur. So the ways that you can get information that we would request is go to our website, so Boulder OEM, it says ODM, that component of me saying we're disaster management and emergency management. There's your example. But boulderoem.com, if you click our homepage, it's got recent alerts that are always up there at the top. And then social media, both from our website, which will link you to our social media as well, is a great spot to find reliable information that isn't just hearsay, but it's the formal information that's coming out. So now, on to the personal risk assessment. I know I'm flying through this, but come to the 11th, and then we'll slow down. So for personal risk assessment, this is really focused on thinking about how you focus in on the things that you might need to pay attention to as you create a plan for yourself during emergencies, because each person is different. My plan would not necessarily work for someone else, and vice versa. So with this, we kind of frame it in a way of looking at your lifelines, because no matter what the disruption or disaster is, if you've got lifelines that you can maintain, you're going to be all right for the most part. So if you can maintain your safety and security, your food, water, and shelter, health and medical, whether that's supplies, your well-being, those kind of things. Power and gas, that's thinking about like if you need to heat your home, make food, those types of things, that can be really essential. Having communication, so do you have a way to communicate with other folks? And that might be your phone, which you use every day. In a severe situation, you might be like, well, I have to walk down the road because we're all snowed in and go talk to my neighbor. It can be any style. Transportation, so thinking about what does your transportation look like in the event that you would have to evacuate. That's thinking about things, do I own a vehicle? Do I need to coordinate a way that I could get out if I don't have reliable transportation? That type of thing. And then other personal lifelines. When we've presented this information in the past, folks have brought things up like, well, finances, what do I do about that? Or my spiritual well-being is really important to me. You can add on to this list to your heart's content. And, you know, depending on who you ask, some of that might fit under health and medical. Or finances might be food, water, and shelter. Your finances help you fund those things. But these are the lifelines that we really want folks to kind of think about as you assess and figure out, like, where do I feel really good? I've got ways, if I had no power, I've got ways to maintain these. Or if I had to evacuate, I've got ways to maintain these. Or are there areas that you think, I don't know that I've got a great plan for my transportation or communication. I should really think about having a charger in my car in case I need to plug my phone in because it's about to die. So think about things like that. And we go over that in depth, much more in depth than this on the 11th. So there's that. And then with those things, as you think about those, and I know this is like the rapid fire session, but thinking about, you know, if there were areas of those lifelines, so let's say I don't feel good about transportation, what are 2 to 3 actions that you might be able to take to improve that lifeline for yourself? So if I don't have a vehicle, okay, I'm gonna think about a friend that lives near me that I could contact, and my last ditch effort is public transportation, or I know there's a bike path I can head out to and start walking if I need it. Not what I would recommend, but thinking about how for you that could work best so that you have a reliable way to maintain that lifeline, if that makes sense. And if not, we will have time for questions to revisit. So the next stage of this is creating a plan. And so when you create a plan for yourself, taking into account those lifelines, coming up with things that work for you. It's really important to make sure that your plan is both actionable and sustainable. And what I mean by that is actionable is something that is feasible for you to do, right? So I'm not gonna be like, I'm gonna take a plane and just fly out of here. I don't have a plane, I have no access to a plane. Not an option for me. So your plan needs to be realistic, and then the sustainable component comes in of not having it be like energy efficient, but rather, is this something that I could maintain over the course of days if I needed to? Is this something that I can repeat and that is kind of exercisable for yourself so you can get that pattern down and maintain it? Because it's great to say, oh, I have power for, 2 hours if I run out, but then I don't know what I'm gonna do, versus, okay, my plan has a lot more depth to it of how I could maintain these things. And then plan components that we'll go over are communication. That encompasses like how you're getting information, but how you're communicating out with others. So loved ones, as folks mentioned, like how you're checking in on friends, folks in this room. Evacuation, so thinking about the plans that need to go into that for it to be successful. And then a grab list, formerly maybe known as like a kit. You build a kit. We have kind of gone away with that because a kit is something that you have to maintain. And so a grab list can be a little more realistic to make sure that if you have medications, food, circumstances change in your life, you've got something that's much more easily updatable rather than a bag or a box of stuff that's maybe been in there 6 years and the food's all not great anymore and it's not really functional for you. So that's what we'll talk about a little more depth here. So for communication, like we mentioned with alert and warning, your first phase is get informed, whether that is you rely on a neighbor to give you a call, you're signed up for alerts, you've got social media dialed in, whatever that might be. Make sure you've got your plan for how you're getting information and using that Boulder OEM website as your secondary source for the depth of information. Making sure that you stay informed. So once you get the initial alert, sometimes it's figuring out, okay, how do I know when things change? How do I know if my home was evacuated? When can I go back in? How do I check in on my neighbor who I think wasn't doing too hot once they got to the evacuation shelter? Those types of things. So figuring out how you stay informed both from loved ones, but from like a logistical standpoint as well. Making sure that you have key contacts. I think about this on my way here today, I realized my phone's at like 20%. And that's not super helpful if I was to be in a situation where I need it and I have no way to plug into power. So thinking about, can you have key contacts in your wallet, on a hard copy piece of paper, something where it's not dependent on an electronic device? Because you could easily ask someone else, hey, can I use your phone? I've got a number to dial. And folks in this room may be better than me, but I think I know like 2 phone numbers by heart because cell phones have dampened my ability to memorize anything important in my phone. So thinking about that for yourself. And then thinking about texting versus calling. In times of disaster, cell towers get overloaded very quickly because you've got all the 911 calls that are potentially coming in and folks trying to communicate back and forth. And so with that, a workaround can be texting folks because sometimes that'll go through easier than a phone call might, and connectivity might be better as well, depending on what the weather conditions are, those types of things, versus having to stay on a line with someone and not have it cut in and out, especially when we're thinking about like high winds, some of those pieces that can sometimes impact that. So that's just a little blip on communication. Going on next is evacuation. This is a hot topic for folks. I will say things that have been done in regards to evacuation in our county, 2 really core things that have been really great progress. One is every square inch of dirt in Boulder County is now under a polygon or a specific zone. And so what that's enabled our folks that are out in the field to do is if they say, okay, we've got a fire in this area, they know, great, I'm gonna call dispatch, tell them we need 42L and 43L lit up. They don't have to worry about taking time to draw out areas, communicate back with dispatch. They can do that in 2 minutes. And so that's really enabled us to get evacuation notifications out much quicker because there's a lot of concern about under alerting, but then also over alerting, because when we over alert, that puts extra vehicles on the road and that then delays times for the folks that really need to get out for a critical need versus folks that are like, I got alerted, I'm not really in the danger zone. So that's something that we've really dialed in on, working with our law enforcement and fire partners. And then the other thing is evacuation routes. Law enforcement and fire officials from throughout the county have been meeting, I'd say probably once every 3 or 4 weeks to really get evacuation routes dialed down so that they know, okay, here's our pressure points, here's whenever we need to have staffing so that we can get those routes moving quicker. So that's my little spiel on what has been done, and that takes a big load off of just chaos that can ensue. There's a direct plan for that. But for you personally, what you need to think about for your plan when you think about evacuation is transportation. So one, what is your modality that you're getting out on? We talked to an assisted care home a few months back, and someone there was like, no one's coming to get me, but I bought a $17,000 wheelchair, and I'm wheeling myself down the road. Wonderful. Unconventional, but he had a plan. And so thinking about, for him, he was concerned of, my family might not get here. I've got this. Think about for yourself, okay, if you have a vehicle that's shared or it's not reliable or whatever the state may be, think about how you'll get out. And so coordinating with folks in the area, that type of thing. Secondly is your routes. Lots of us probably go on autopilot. You like get in your car and you're like, all right, I'm going to work, I'm going to this school, I'm going to wherever I'm going. You don't think about it. But really in an evacuation time, your normal route might be cut off or delayed in some way. And so thinking ahead of time, okay, I know 2 different ways out of my neighborhood. And for some folks, I know there's like one road in, one road out. That is the case. But that's something you can also assess and figure out, maybe I go at the warning stage rather than the evacuation order stage, right? And so this is, again, the like depth and complexity of figuring out what your situation is and what then works best for you. So knowing your routes, and then being able to maintain those lifelines once you evacuate. So that's things like, okay, do I have maybe water stored in my car? In the winter, that's tough here in Colorado because it might freeze. So you might have a block of ice in your car. But do you have like maybe a phone charger in your car, or perhaps a blanket in the winter that you keep so that you've got that shelter, safety, security component? You're not gonna freeze if you're stuck in your car somewhere in a winter weather event or things like that. So for me, the big ones are like power for a phone, because that's a huge lifeline to maintain for communication, and things to keep you like safe from the elements, I think is really key. So those are just some of the lifelines to think about for evacuation. And then the very last thing is a grab list. And so thinking about, rather than that kit, if you want a kit, that is not wrong, because I know some folks do that and it's very successful. But if you're gonna commit to a kit, you also have to commit to the maintenance of a kit, which means swapping the food out, swapping medications that might go bad or get too cold or not the right temperature. So we recommend this grab list, which there's 7 Ps. The Ps aren't directly aligned. You might be thinking like, plastic, what in the world? I don't need to bring boxes of plastic with me. You don't, but we'll go over them. So the first thing is people. People, I would say, are the most important. You wanna make sure that your loved ones, your neighbors, whoever you care about is out. You've got them with you, they are grabbed. Second would be pets. Papers isn't just random papers. That's things like important documents that you might have. If you keep those all in one location, I think that's a really great piece to work towards this so you can do it quickly. Prescriptions, that includes things like medical supplies, eyeglasses if you need them, because those will all be really important as you navigate out of whatever situation you're in. Pictures, that can also be things like, I was talking to someone the other day and she's like, if I could grab anything, it'd be my kid's baby blanket and their little stuffy, and that would be it. I don't care about anything else. And so thinking about what are some irreplaceable things that you would want to grab. Personal computers, if you back things up to a cloud, wonderful. If you have a laptop that's easy to grab, wonderful, or external hard drive, that's great. And then the plastic, the most confusing thing on here, but that is the equate to make it fit into the 7 Ps, not 5, is money. Have some way of paying for things. Credit cards is the plastic in mind here, but if you have cash on you, whatever it is, that is great. And I will say with this is like in an ideal world, you have time to go through and grab all these and it's wonderful. Sometimes you don't, and so that's where I would really underscore, and to each person it's different, but think about what you can't replace, because if you can buy it, not to say that that means it's easy to lose, but there's an ability for you to regain that resource, that thing that you had, versus if there's mementos, things like that, that's a lot more challenging to have to work through replacing in some way or backing up or getting from relatives if they've got shared things. So just thinking about those. And what I recommend with this grab list too is like make it and then write down the location of things if it's really important. Like in my house, I know I've got one box of stuff that's really important to me that's on my dresser, and then a photo in my living room cabinet. If I grab nothing else, great, I've got those 2 things, I'm good to go. And other stuff would be nice. But that's something I encourage is like, in the moment, we go through milling and your brain kind of freezes when there's a disaster or something that's shocking. And so thinking about if you have a list with, okay, this box of things, it's in living room cupboard, great. This is in kitchen, second shelf, whatever it is, that can help you in those moments of freezing to be like, okay, I've got 2 minutes, I'm gonna grab this and go. So that's my little advice on the grab list. And then additional considerations that are really important to think about is access and functional needs. So do you have folks that you know in your life who might have like English as a second language, so the typical alerts and information being pumped out might not be as readily available to them, because we typically have things English, Spanish, or working on translation apps for some of those alerts. Do you know someone who's a wheelchair user who might need assistance getting out or getting transportation somewhere? Thinking about those types of things for yourself, loved ones, those around you. Also thinking about time and place. So for your plan, on a work day, that might look very different than a weekend day, or if it's at 11 a.m. versus 9 p.m., how those things might change what your plans are. And then pets, just making sure that you plan for pets as much as possible. So as you grab your food, all your stuff, making sure, do I have a leash for the dog? Okay, great, I do. Do I have food for the dog? Something like that, to make sure that you're accounting for those things as well, because that can sometimes easily get forgotten. Because again, you're in that like, I gotta focus in and I'm kind of in freeze mode, and the things that normally to us would be very sensical aren't always when we get in these states. So that's my very quick Cliff Notes version of this. We have 6 minutes left for questions, which is why I was going full speed. But yeah, we've got 6 minutes for questions if you've got them, and then come to the 11th if you would like a more in-depth and slow version.
Hi, thank you, Monica. So we actually have a question online first, and we're
great.
going to take it from John. If you'd
Yeah.
like to unmute yourself, John.
Yes, can you shut off your gas and water at your home?
Can you shut off your gas and water at your home? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yes, should you?
Oh, should you? If you have the ability to and time allows for it, yes. I would say if there is fire somewhere that you can see, very easily visible from your house, and you don't have time, I would say get yourself out of there, because I think the personal life safety is the most important part.
Thank you.
What have you learned from the Marshall Fire in the last year?
Yeah, I think that we've learned a lot. I will say also, I started with the county back in August. I was at CU before then, so some of that is pre my time. But I think a lot of the work that's been done with the evacuation planning, the different polygons, is to really help that alerting piece come out quicker, and for municipalities to be able to support that as well. Because the way alerting works is the county doesn't necessarily alert the entire county. It's kind of a nuanced thing that our office serves City of Boulder and county, and so if it gets tossed to like sheriff's office or becomes a county-wide event, we're sending it out. If not, it's on individual municipalities to send out their alerts. And so I think that there's been a lot of collaboration since Marshall Fire to really get going on that, because we know like that was for sure a sticking point for folks, and rightly so. And so working on that to make sure that folks feel more confident. There's also been a lot of look at like, how do we mitigate land? How do we make sure that like ditches, cisterns, all that are able to go in, and working on grants for that as well. So if that answers that question, I know it's a shallow level one, but happy to connect as well afterwards.
Thank you. We have another question coming online from Lynn.
Great.
Yeah, I live about a couple blocks from a new development that's on the WUI. You know what the WUI is? Wildlands Urban Interface. And there are 300 parking spaces on the edge of Boulder in this development. So do you have any suggestion for, like, I'm not going to get out of my house. I don't see it because they've got rescue people coming in and there's one way out. You know, I mean, there's a number of streets, gridded streets, but how are you going to get out of there when you've got 300 parking spaces evacuating themselves to get out when you've got rescue people coming in? How's the rest of the neighborhood going to get out?
Yeah, so I think it sounds like the question is a bit around like if there's a lot of congestion, there's a parking lot near where you live, how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, people always die in their car in floods, you know, the same thing with fires.
Yeah, I would say.
And also, the gas pumps are going to be used up unless everybody's got a full tank. In that immediate area, they're going to be evacuated of gas to get out. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think that's something to work into your personal plan as well. For my job, I'm like, well, I could have to go at any moment's notice, so I always make sure I have some gas in my car, like quarter of a tank. And I know that that might feel like, oh, that's a reach. I don't know if I'm going to think about that all the time. That's something where you can kind of assess your situation of, okay, do I want to have this or do I not? There's no right or wrong answer. So that might be just setting yourself a reminder and a new habit of making sure there's gas in your vehicle. I think another component with that kind of like gridlock that can occur is that unfortunately is the nature of when an order goes out. That's likely going to occur. And our law enforcement officials really work to identify those points to be able to say, here's where we've got to get these arteries flowing for people to get out. But part of what makes it a disaster is it is not always easy to navigate through. And so that's where I would really underscore the like, if you know you live in a situation where you're like, this is gonna be pretty crunched up, think about, okay, I got a warning, I think I'm gonna go and drive away from wherever the warning is about, just to give yourself that additional time. I know for me, during Marshall, I live in Broomfield, and being a risk-averse person, I was like, I'm gonna go to Longmont now anyway, just because that felt safe for me. So there's no right or wrong answer, but doing what makes you feel comfortable and knowing your surroundings. I think that's really great that you're aware of kind of what the environment is around you, and making sure to just take action early with that would be my recommendation.
Yes. Do you have any sense of how much resources, human and financial, Boulder spends on emergency management today versus, say, at the beginning of the century or whenever?
What was the second part of that?
No, can you compare the resources that Boulder spends now on emergency management, both human, your human, and financial, versus some point in the past?
Yeah, I don't have those numbers. I will say we spend a lot when we get into disasters and we activate. Money kind of goes out the window in a sense of like, we'll do what we can to protect life safety and property and whatnot, and life safety comes first. I don't have hard numbers. I know that we're still, like our recovery folks that work for the county are still working on flood recovery, and I know like they keep getting millions of dollars reimbursed from FEMA, so it's a high dollar amount that we have, but I can look into numbers for that and share that along to this group.
I think we have time for one more question.
Monica, can you talk about Zone Haven?
I can. So Zone Haven is, for folks who are not aware, it is a third-party app that the city of Boulder has acquired, or it's not an app, I lie. It's a map resource that is becoming an app, but it is used by the city of Boulder to both not alert folks, but it basically adds situational awareness to folks, both that are on the operations side on the back end and for folks that are in the community. So previously on our website, we've got a county map, and typically for that to get spun up, we have to get a hold of GIS. GIS puts in the information, and then it gets published. Zone Haven allows us to do all that work that used to take like 30 minutes or more. We can do it in 2 minutes, so that there's a community-facing map that's got information about what zones are evacuated, what zones are to warning. So that's a really useful tool. I know that my boss and our 911 center directors are meeting with our Boulder Regional Telephone Emergency Services Authority this coming Monday to talk about getting it for the entire county. So we've got some continuity there. But yeah, really useful tool to be able to glance at. You don't have to know your zone ahead of time. Like folks are like, I have to know I'm in 42. I'm like, you don't. If you know where you live and you can find it on a map, you'll be able to look at the map and see that. What it is not, it's not an alerting tool. So Everbridge is the platform that we use for alerting in the county. That's the only spot, or WIAs, that you would get those from. Zone Haven is just like a awareness tool so that you can see that. We can throw like emergency shelter information on there, animal evacuation shelters, those kind of things for easy public access. Yeah.
Monica, I want to thank you so much for coming to talk to you. And I also want to mention that this is the first speaker that the Rotary Wildfire Ready Committee has sponsored, and I'm really proud of the fact that we're able to bring information to the club. And I also want to tell everybody there's sign-up sheets, so yellow pieces of paper on your desk to sign up for the February 11th class. It's at the Boulder Library, and like she said, she'll go through into more detail, and you'll go home with an actual action plan. So please sign up for the class. We're also proud to sponsor that. And I want to tell you, one of Rotary's objectives has been to end polio in the world. And so in your honor, we are donating 100 doses of polio vaccine to the Polio Plus Fund.
Aw,
so thank you so much for your talk.
Yes, thank you all for having me.